Good morning, everybody. Sorry, don't have a spot to put your coffee. You're going to have to sit it right on your knee. You're right. So we are continuing our study of the divine call. If you remember last week, we talked about a number of ways that people could enter the ministry. One would be through the assignment committee, that the Conference of Presidents, the assignment committee would, that's how they handle graduates. We talked about different synodical positions that could be filled by an election or an appointment. What we want to focus on now is, but how do most pastors find their way into a particular congregation? How does the call process for those who are already in congregations work? So, a couple things we need to think about. First of all, a vacancy occurs, whether it's through a death or a retirement, or a called worker accepts a call to another location, or a new position is created. So when we said, boy, we need to expand another classroom, we're not, because somebody left, we're just adding on another teacher, or many congregations are saying we need an associate, and so that's a new one. So what do you do? You contact the district president. He's the avenue that you're going to work through. He's going to help evaluate the needs of the congregation. We'll talk about that in a minute. What might that be? What are their plans? And then they need to talk to the district president so he can come up with a call list that would help them meet that need. So, what are some of those things? What kinds of congregational needs and corresponding skills or ability of a pastor can be helpful for a congregation to discuss when there's a vacancy? I mean, do you just say, we need a warm body? Anybody? Well, that's a pretty long list. Pastor's looking for you to kind of narrow it down a little bit. I mean, what makes your congregation different than any other ones? I mean, we want him to preach the gospel. Well, yeah, okay. Can you maybe give me a little more direction? What are you looking for in your pastor? What are some of the things that might be appropriate to say? Yeah, here's what our congregation needs.
Well, they may want to look at starting a school, so they'll need someone to administer and help start a school.
Maybe if they're going to start a school, we want somebody who's got some administrative gifts, as a pastor even, right, that they're going to open up a school. Brenda?
We're looking for somebody to lead management classes. You'd want someone who's good at working with the middle school age range.
Right? Are they going to work with youth? Is this a family ministry position? Do they have some skill sets in that? Maybe that would factor into their age a little bit.
Maybe you have a service in a language other than English, like Finnish or Spanish, or
right.
Maybe you'd like to have that skill.
We may need them to be bilingual. I mean, when you think about down at the Bethel Menasha, that narrowed the list down. You know, he's got to be fluent in Spanish. That's pretty important, right? Or was it Benton Harbor that still has a service in German? Wow, that really narrows it down. How many of those guys are floating around? So yes, that may be a factor as well. Other things that a congregation might say makes them unique, that they might be looking for. Give me one more, Kurt.
Maybe they have a certain form of worship where they really want the pastor to be chanting everything. And there's probably a lot of pastors who would rather not have that call.
Great point. You know, if it's there some particular worship styles that are important to a congregation, may be part of it. Anybody else?
Evangelism. They want to start an evangelism program.
Right. Maybe it's an evangelism program. I mean, you think about, I always think, an evangelism program is maybe something that fits, and maybe I should wait with this, but as you're contemplating a call, I always felt like if you're the evangelism guy, that's probably a call that's easier to take as a new person. right? If you're called to be the administrative pastor, the senior pastor who knows all the makeup of the congregation, that might be a little harder for the young guy to do, but evangelism, when I came to Mount Olive, that was the easiest thing for me, to just say, well, I don't know anybody. I might as well just go visit non-members because they look the same to me as members do. So that made it a little easier. If you're being called to be, the administrator, that may be different. To help congregations do that, typically, Pastor Zank will have them work through a pre-call survey form that that the leaders of the congregation kind of do a little self-analysis. What do you think are the real strengths of this congregation? What do you think are particular needs, or what do we need to work on yet? Give a word or phrase that describes the current mood of your congregation. I mean, that may factor in that if the congregation is just, torn apart, and we need somebody to kind of pull it together, that's important to know. I remember District President Engelbrecht, when I was considering the call to Mount Olive, said, we really need somebody who's a smiling face. Thought, well, I could do that. That's not hard. Let's put the low bar pretty low. I'll take it. No. But that was part of it. What's the spirit of the congregation? What are they going through? Some other factors, just rating your church on congregational unity. Is it friendly? Tell us how you carry out church discipline. Does it happen at all? What was your elders list look like? Are people satisfied with your lay leadership? Are they satisfied with your pastoral leadership? How are you doing with nurturing all ages? How about reaching out to the lost? So this would help a pastor kind of get to know the congregation so he can find a list of candidates who fit well with that. Typically, a couple other things that pastor will always ask about is, tell me about your support for your pastor. I mean, are you at Synod Code? Can a person live on the salary you are offering? And sometimes that's not always the case. And when they're calling for the 12th time with a very subpar salary, sometimes there has to be a conversation about that. The salary you are offering to pay is not sufficient to provide for the needs of a pastor. So that sometimes is part of the discussion as well. What is your housing like? And even, is there a particular age range? We talked about youth ministry. Maybe that is. We're looking for somebody younger, or we need somebody with a ton of experience. As we developed a call for pastor to develop a call list for Indonesia, for example, there was kind of a balancing act. Yes, we want somebody with some experience, but, if he's going to spend the next 3 years learning Bahasa Indonesia and he's 63, we're not going to get a lot of return on that investment. So because of that, we need somebody a little bit younger that, once you put in all that time, is actually going to be able to put it into use as well. Questions there? Mary?
So if the salary is insufficient, does the Synod supplement, or do they just come in and help support with reevaluating the budget?
Correct. I'd say the latter. A self-sufficient, a non-mission congregation, they would say, you guys, this is up to you. Now, if they flat can't do it, yeah, they would say, let's take a look at this. And it may be that, boy, I don't know if you can afford a full-time pastor. Maybe it's time for you to consider merging with another congregation, would be, or maybe it's only a retirement call, at some point. And those are some hard discussions, but sometimes that's just the facts, is that you don't have the group that can support a full-time pastor.
So then is that sometimes where some of the rural churches have, you preach at 8 a.m. and then you go to the other church and preach at 10:30?
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. And it's, I think there's kind of pressure there two ways. There's maybe they don't have the funding to support a pastor, and maybe there aren't enough pastors to go around. That it's like, if a man is saying, I feel like there's a greater need here than the 12 people that you are worshiping with every week. Just reality. So let's talk a little bit about, exactly how that call process works. District presidents take information provided by the congregation and researches for candidates who meet the congregation's needs and who are eligible for a call. We'll talk about that in a minute. So he's kind of matching these two things up. Let's get to know the congregation. Now let's get to know the candidates. Let's research them. A call meeting is scheduled in which the district president or his designee, district vice president or a circuit pastor, presents the list of candidates. So typically, I think pastor's practice is he likes to be at the first call meeting for sure, but after that, oftentimes a circuit pastor will take over if subsequent call meetings are necessary. District president provides biographical and personal information, including interests and strengths on each candidate. So every pastor in the synod is asked to do a little bit of a self-assessment. What do we feel our strengths are in terms of what are our abilities in particular areas, administration, language, do you know German? Are you the one guy that could do this? Latin. What types of ministries are you able to do ministry in, whether it's hospital shut-ins, so we rank ourselves in ability, preference. So I can do this, but it's not, I do not have a passion for it. I'd rather not do. I could do, but I have a minimal interest. I will do. I enjoy the task, or I have a heart for it. So when we asked Pastor to develop a call list for Indonesia, that was pretty critical. Foreign missions, I have a heart for, right? Or at least a 4 or 5 to say, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to leave the United States and go live somewhere else. Okay, that's not necessarily a big list, but that's great feedback. Experience. So have you ever done that? So you might say somebody, yes, I have. I worked with Friends of China overseas, so I've got some experience overseas. Or maybe I don't, but I just have a heart for it. I can't wait to do it. And then the last category is training. Have you had any additional training in this area? No focus training, attended some conferences. It's an area of regular study with focused work, or it's an area of regular study and focused work resulting in a degree. So maybe a pastor has actually took a degree in counseling. Well, that's pretty critical to know that, oh man, let's match that person up. Or, we've got guys that say, yeah, I'm fluent in Mandarin, for example. Well, boy, that's pretty critical for us to know that. So this gives the Conference of Presidents important information, and they're oftentimes on the circuit pastors to say, make sure your guys are doing this, make sure you're filling it out, so that when, if the last time you filled this out, you said you had no kids, and then it shows up at a call list, oh, by the way, I've got 4 now, it's like, make sure it's updated so that the information that he has is up to date. And we're seeing, additional information. A lot of the strength finders are now showing up on this just to help us evaluate matching up the needs and the resources that we have. Calling body, last one here. Calling body, usually the voters' assembly discusses each candidate and votes. Once the voting identifies the person called, my screen keeps going out, a motion is made to make the call unanimous. If you've ever been at a voters' meeting, a call meeting, you know this, but you might say why did they do that? Why do they make the call unanimous after you decide that somebody's called? Ever been there? Over there.
Then you don't have a problem of, well, I voted for this guy, and he voted for that, and it's, a church related for it.
right? The congregation is behind you. The last thing a pastor wants to hear is, 51%, huh, I got? Oh, good. And who are the 49? Right? No. We are unanimous in this. And that's part of trusting the process, right? It's not really a human thing. It's like we trust that God guided this process, and we're not going to split hairs, but we're going to say a majority. That's who it is. And those who voted not for that person, I think recognize, that was God's hand. I'm going to trust that this is what God led us to vote for. We're behind him. Somebody had a hand up.
You would just very quickly reference strength finders. I don't know if you'd already talked about that, because I'm new here, but especially in a congregation like Mount Olive that has multiple pastors, I have really appreciated the use of tools like that in terms of a pastor's personality and style versus the things he likes to do. That is just, seems to me so vital if you're going to build a team that works well together.
Great point. The whole concept of strength finders. Just learning what makes that other person tick. Why do they do it like that? I know we went to the same training. We all went to the same seminary. Our doctrine is the same, but boy, he's just wired a little bit different. And I think it helps us understand ourselves and say, that's why Raasch has got to see all the details, because his strengths are analytical. He's going to look into it, and deliberative. That's why it takes him forever to do it, because he's deliberative. In fact, I think that was simply because when I took the test, half of the questions I weren't even done answering them. My time's up. They're going, this guy is too deliberative. The point is, that's a great tool to help us understand, the gifts that God has given us. Strength finders. Over here, Kurt.
So, look at this process. Is there a filter in it after the DP gets information and says, I understand you'd like to call your 17th pastor from this very large congregation. You certainly have the budget for it. Could I get you to consider a different option? I mean, is that anywhere in the process?
Pastor.
So just last week, I got a chance to sit down with President Gergel at MLC, and we talked about this very thing, and probably maybe putting some renewed emphasis on staff ministry again. And we talked about how that looks, and just the way you were describing it, Kurt, I said it almost has to be that kind of organic type of conversation where they've called for a while and they're becoming convinced something's not happening here. What else could we do? And so we're actually talking about giving some permission to Dr. Olson's office that when the DP sees a congregation, and maybe they've got 3 associates already, to say, is this a possibility for your congregation? We could give you a man who is trained in the area of ministry you're looking for. He's not going to be in your pulpit, but there's many, many things that he can do for you. And let them chew on that a bit. Some of our congregations, I think particularly in Milwaukee, I think it's starting to happen in our district too, who have been calling for associates, have kind of worn themselves out and have stopped calling, or at least they take a break for a while. I've had a congregation in our district take a break, probably take about 3-4 months off, then start calling again, just because it isn't happening. And there's some discouragement with that. We have, just in the last month, 3 or 4 medium to large congregations decide to add staff. So our vacancy rate has gone up by 4 or 5 pastor vacancies in the district just by the desire to add an associate. So at a time when we're all kind of scrambling to figure out what's the pool look like, these congregations, bless them, I'm not going to tell them don't do that, but I do give them the realities of the situation right now. And my own perspective is that it's very difficult for people to think about leaving a flock someplace to come and be the third guy on a staff. Even though he's needed, the numbers bear it out, but I think it's a hard thing for a pastor to say, I'm going to leave my flock, and they may not get a pastor for 2 years, and they'll be without. So, thanks, yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes it's a give and take. I mean, he's not the Pope. He can't say, thou shalt not call. You don't get one. You
And
leave that-
Pastor Raasch is always reminding me of that, so that's a good thing.
He's omniscient, but he's not the Pope. Okay, go ahead, Mary.
So let's say you make the decision to leave your church and go be an associate pastor. What does that church do for the 2 years? Do they, board of elders step in?
Yeah, so we have a congregation not too far away from us. They are almost 2 years into a vacancy now, and we rely heavily on our circuit pastor to help us figure out what that interim ministry looks like. Here in the valley, we have quite a core of retired pastors who have really organized themselves and said, we're standing ready to help and serve, and they will go up to Oconto Falls and maybe even points a little north of that and help us. They're supply preachers, so they're not carrying on the day-to-day ministry, but we're able to carry on, Sunday services, weekend worship services, and then we'll have pastors in the area that will step in and we'll figure out how to teach catechism and what meetings we need to attend and who's making hospital visits and who's preaching for funerals. And so we keep it moving, but of course it's not ideal. Because it's just very difficult. What we will see during that time is a lot of lay leadership step up, and sometimes I have watched as God has used long vacancies to have a congregation say, oh, we're not just hiring help, we're calling somebody to do ministry with us, not for us, and that's a really great blessing. I've seen that in a couple of instances, and boy, can that congregation go then when they've got their shepherd with them.
Good point. We'll talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of a vacancy. Just to follow up a little bit, how does the district president do his research? We touched on that. It's not tea leaves. It's not interrogation. It's the input that we have, provide to him, and then the other people that he's talking to that know these candidates, et cetera. Debbie?
In the process, was there ever a time when a DP might look at social media to see what the candidate has out there? I have my daughter-in-law said that when they're trying to follow social media, how much I'm going to drink. Thinking you're going to drink meeting. Is it going to be like that?
That is a discussion that is often had on both sides. I mean, certainly the graduates. I mean, that's a talk that he has with all the graduates. Now listen, you're being called into ministry. It's time to, because people are going to look. Members are going to look. So is that how you want to be introduced to your congregation? Okay, here's the pastor, and look what all he's done. Time to scrub that. I mean, God offers forgiveness. You don't have to flaunt it. I mean, your dirty laundry. So absolutely, and ongoing. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago as well. The idea that we have to be careful what we say. We are always in this position. We're all ministers of the gospel, and what we say, we can't just say, okay, now I'm going to talk about myself as this political person. I'm still a pastor. And my wife is still the wife of a pastor. So what she says reflects on the ministry as well. So yeah, it's both ways. And then also, I mean, from the other way, at a call meeting, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the information that the district president presents is what you should go on. It's not, okay, let's get those names. Now let's go. Now let's quick. While the meeting's going on, let me look him up. No. Go with the information that was given you. These are candidates that are qualified for the job. Let the Holy Spirit work. You are not a PI to figure this out. Let the Holy Spirit work through it. Over here, Dolores.
Do you ever get to the point where you call and say, maybe we should use consolidated levels and not try to walk?
Yep, exactly. I mean, and I think what he mentioned about, it's not something you can just dictate, but it's kind of internally a conclusion that people come to. Maybe this is the Lord's will. Kind of like prayers, right? Just, Lord, you didn't give me a sign, but boy, maybe this is what you're saying here, is we need to rethink this. This was our plan. Maybe that's not your plan. We've got to look at an alternate plan, whether it's combining congregations or downsizing or something along those lines. And then balance that with recruiting, so we can reach out to these factors. these fields, I should say. Another one, what factors will lead a district president not to use a name on a call list? So we start with this big, all the pastors in the WELS, we're going to narrow it down. Well, is there anybody that you would not say, or you'd say, nope, can't use his name? Is it wide open? Everybody's free, open season?
I'm sure you have a child who's going through treatment, chemo, or cancer, or something like that, and there are, life happens for pastors too, and that's not now. Well, burden.
Correct. There are some unique situations where the district presidents are aware of a situation that would just be, we feel like this is not a good time for that person going through a unique challenge. Maybe it's in the congregation, maybe it's in his personal life. Those are kind of exceptions to the rule. Maybe it's even something like, the person has said, I am not a team player, I am a lone wolf, I would never be in a associate situation. His bishop's report as a vicar said the same thing. That might be a name that you just say, I'm not sure I'm going to call him into an associate position. Right? Maybe a missionary, yes, maybe not for associate would be one. But there's probably a couple other big ones that automatically are off the list.
Especially if you just returned a call.
Bullseye. Right? In our synod, so that pastors are not just overwhelmed by calls, we have two rules. One is, once you are at a new position, you will not receive a call for 4 years. It's kind of your chance to kind of settle in, to get the work done. You focus on that 4 years. Whether you were assigned out of the seminary or you were somewhere else and then you came to a place, you're kind of off limits for 4 years. And so you'll see that. I mean, once they're out 4 years of seminary, all those guys are kind of looking over their shoulder. Could be any minute now, right? Any time, unless there are extenuating circumstances like they're working for the district president and he says, nope, you got to stay a little longer. The other one is, even if you've been out 4 years, okay, you get your first call to another congregation and you decline it, you are also off limits for 6 months. So that again, you're not just being overwhelmed. You can kind of, okay, focus on that and pray about it, but then know, okay, I get a bit of a window here. They are allowing, because there's so many vacancies and that list of candidates is so short, once you start doing that, they are allowing at times a person to get 2 calls at the same time. Just to give a little more freedom for congregations to have names. And so sometimes that happens. And I don't think that's a bad thing, that if you're going to really sit down and evaluate, your presence in this congregation, I might as well consider 2 more and just look at everything and say, okay, here's my options. Here's 3 options instead of 2 options. It happened to me a number of times in my ministry in Houghton where you'd get 2 calls and, okay, well, as long as I'm going through the process, I'm talking to my leaders, etc., it gives me a chance to reflect on both of those. Not necessarily a bad thing. That would especially, it's almost a requirement if you were in a situation where a mission congregation was closed, an exploratory, and they said, nope, this is not where the Lord wants us to be. We're going to not just give you one other one, we're going to give you a number of them so you can reflect on where you go from here. Brenda.
I also say there's like a mismatch in skills and interests. That's so like if you're looking for someone to go to Indonesia, they score really low on one thing to ministry overseas, maybe you'll call that person if they're not going to that person.
Yep, great point. I mean, that's part of narrowing it down. And why also, although it is allowed to add a name from the floor at a call meeting, not necessarily encouraged. In fact, it's discouraged. Because, you don't know, I know this guy, he's good looking, let's call him. I heard him preach before. Do you even know if he's eligible for a call? What have you matched him up? Just because you know him, you heard him preach, that means he's a good fit. If that's your only criteria, boy, I know that guy. I'm not sure that's the right kind of criteria we should use anyway, but sometimes we do that. Oh, I know that guy, you know. So let's let the Holy Spirit guide this process to match skills with needs would be more appropriate. Take a look. The call process for congregations is not a hiring process, right? This is where people from the secular world just go, what? What do you mean you got a call? What does that mean? Don't you mean you applied for a job, right? You're job hunting? No. And so oftentimes people apply that to calls and say, how come you're getting so many calls? Don't you like it here? Did you put your name in? Why don't you take your name out? No, that's not it at all. It's not. I'm not looking for a different job. It's not. I wasn't hired. I'm called. So that means there's no interviews of candidates. There's no audition sermons, at least in our synod. Recognize in other synods that they do that, right? They have a whole search team. They bring the guy in and let him preach. And they interview him. They bring him over and they show him the town and they show him the parsonage and you know, their welcome committee. They interview him just like you might do with any, you know, whatever, big wig, you're out headhunting somebody. Not a part of the process. No extensive resume. It's a pretty short thing that the district president gives you. So what are we doing? We're trusting in the Lord that He's working through the district president's judgment that any person on the list is qualified for this particular call. Right? We're putting it in the Lord's hands. We're just saying, and it's important to do that. It's not like, well, there's one right one. We got to figure out who the right one is. Oh, man. Oh, let's figure out who the right one is. No, they're all the right one. These are candidates who have been through our seminary. They are doctrinally true to doctrine. They are all good fits. And so I really can't get the wrong one. And this is why we say, if we wanted to throw darts, we could throw darts and say, God's going to guide this process. Brenda.
Wasn't that also where the student teaching component for teachers in the vicar year component for pastors comes in handy? Because even though, yes, you don't necessarily have interviews or like these long resumes, you still have a chance to use like a practical way of learning your skills. So like when you get to the point where you get the call, it's not like you're going into it completely blind and having no idea what they're like. It's like, no, they some student teaching, they had their vicar year, and it's like, you can always reach out and be like, hey, it's like, what was this like? So it's not like you're going in completely blind. It's like, I'd like to have some idea what they're like because they've had practice.
Great point. Right? It would be a little tougher. If you've never ever done this, we're calling you, you've got a running start, you've had a bishop, you've had feedback on your on-the-job training, all helps prepare you for that day that you are called. So a couple questions. Go ahead. Go, Adam.
Has it ever happened? So when someone takes a call and says they're not recallable for 4 years, does it ever happen that someone's taking a call and they realize this is not within that 6 months to a year, this is not the fit that I thought, or something's changed in something has caused them to change their mind on taking the call that they could. Did that ever happen in the process?
It does. As far as I'm aware of, I mean, there are actually some situations where a person announced a decision and then had second thoughts. Either way, that they said they were going and just said, nope, I've changed my mind on it, and so that's not always very comfortable, but it happens. I expect there are times where a person actually goes and it's not what they expected. I would say it's not like, oh, this call expired, I'm out of here. It would certainly be working with the circuit pastor, working with the district president. Maybe there are situations where, yes, I need to go back to the assignment committee. I need to go and work with the conference of presidents to put me in a different place. And there are some where they, by that, either they or the congregation conclude that they aren't fit for the ministry. And so it's not like, well, we'll send our dirty laundry somewhere else. It's just like, no. I mean, if you can't serve here, what is that saying? Maybe this a call for the public ministry is not God's plan for you. Michael.
Are there guidelines for the time limit on verbal consideration?
Are there guidelines for how long you can consider a call? Off the record, it's typically 2 to 4 weeks. Some of the rationale behind that would be, and this is what I counsel people, is if you've given it prayerful thought and you know this is not a call that you are going to take, don't hang on to it just to make people feel like you spent enough time with it. If you know that, no, this is not a good fit, and we'll talk about criteria we should use for this in a minute, but don't hold on to it. Let the process go. Return it. On the other hand, when people have been considering a call, when the Stephen Wiesenauer was considering a call to be Asia 1 leader, I said, if you're going to say yes, take as long as you need. That's okay. Think about it. This is a big thing. That's okay. Especially if you're going to say yes, then we can wait for you. So maybe that's helps see both ends of it a little bit.
I think in that deliberation time too, those of you who don't know, I'm a pastor. I guess I found it more helpful now where the calls are coming far more often, and I have had calls where probably by the 4th, 5th day it was pretty clear. But the conversations you have with the congregation leaders on the other end, I'm confident can be helpful for them as well. That it's not only about whether I will take this call. I've had some wonderful conversations with congregation leaders that I think 1 or 2 cases maybe changed their thinking a little bit on what they were looking for. So, not that I was trying to do that, but just in asking questions, that even if you don't go, it can be a beneficial thing for those guys.
Great point, right? It's part of the wrestling process. It can be a learning process. We'll talk about that in a minute. So a couple questions. First of all, why do we choose not to interview or audition sermons? So use interviews or audition sermons. It's a pretty important decision. Why not? Over here.
Well, they could have a good day and a good sermon, or you could have had a week where they had a funeral, counseling, family problems, or something like that, and then the pastor hadn't had much time to throw a sermon together. And it's probably in the other person. So, they kind of, they don't, doesn't give a good.
Yeah, don't judge me by 20 minutes, one time. Over here, Jeff.
But you're also looking at other qualifications within just certain.
That's 20 minutes of my week. There's a lot of other ministry that is getting done besides that. That's kind of like, don't judge a book by its cover. Whoa, he looks good, sounds good, but there's far more to a pastor than just a voice. Important. Brenda.
Well, I think with pretty much any other job that you apply for, it's like the candidates you're gonna get are gonna have this huge variety of educational and work backgrounds where it seems like, specifically in the WELS, it's like every candidate you interview is gonna have the same education, a lot of the same background. So it's like at that point, it's like, having like an interview audition service are gonna be like almost like kind of useless because like there's a lot of like, the education background can be the same as like, someone like that. I mean, like I hope their work experience be a little different, but it wouldn't necessarily be like relevant to how they're applying for. So it just seems like you could be getting like a lot of the same without really getting anywhere.
Great point, right? Which is a wonderful thing, right? That we know these men are qualified. They've been through the seminary. It's not like you're picking them off the streets and you're trying to figure out if they can be a pastor. I mean, the people who are charged with this, preparing pastors, evaluating them, and recommending them for the ministry, are doing their jobs. Actually, they do a better job than we could ever do. And so to just know, these are qualified candidates. Throw the dart. Let the Spirit lead and say, this is the man that God has in mind for us. It takes a load off our shoulders and fits just that concept of the Spirit is guiding the process. What are the pros and cons of providing more information on a candidate? We get some. What I just said, those things off my sheet is what you get, is it. Not much more than that. You get the age, you get how many kids they have, you get what other churches they served at. You don't get a photo. Right over here. Not their personality as much as their strengths, what experiences they've had. Because a lot of those other things, don't really matter. They can distract you, and it's why I say, don't go out online and look them up. To try to determine if they're the one person. It's not our job to make the man fit the job. It's God finds the man. God finds the man. Brenda.
Let me look at providing more information and kind of give you some more insight to help potentially narrow down the pool of candidates. But like with any type of survey or application form, no matter how many different ways you organize it or slice and dice it, it's always going to be unique. So it's never going to give you a full picture.
Yep. And the same thing is true for the pastor. As he kind of evaluates the congregation, he's not going to know everything. So he's putting a great deal of trust. God, God, you're going to lead me in this process. Here, Mary.
I think too that additional information can allow it's simple or personal preference to create it as well as an trusting God's process and to guide this and be, oh, you like to fish? I like to fish too. We've got lakes here. I think they'd be great fish. They'd be, and start to customize, that person instead of trusting God's.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Good point. Over here. Greg.
What was the congregation was where that after the preaching the past, did they ever contact you with congregations and just say, what were your life for this place or pros, cons? I mean, to help really make a better decision?
The congregation talking to his former congregation. For sure, not during the call meeting. You wouldn't have time. And I'm not sure you would want to do that either. I mean, it would all depend on, who did you talk to? Did you talk to one of his fans or one of his detractors? Do you really want to make that decision on the basis of, that person's, we don't come with recommendations on our resume. Leave that in the Lord's hands. Over here.
So a lot of problems with the congregation, this is personal experience up in the village. We're eating out and making their president and we're more than Catholic nations in the world. It's full there. That's when you throw back on the TV. Okay, don't get a guy from Florida that's positioned in Florida, that's only interested in Florida, because the big ball out here is going to visit in February, we might not survive.
We don't want to lose any candidates. So those are issues that may factor in. You don't want to let that drive the bus, but you take that into consideration. Okay, let's talk about a couple things. In the process, newly called workers normally take 2 to 4 weeks to make a decision regarding a future or question that was raised. Pastoral vacancies, average of 7 calls issued, vacancy of 6 to 12 months. I mean, that's where we are in our synod right now, which is kind of yikes. I think Mount Olive has been very, very blessed that, our vacancies have not run 7 calls long for a year as well. But that's a balance. I mean, ours have been at the short end. There's been others at the other end, right? 2 years, 3 years. So what do we do? When our congregation has a vacancy, obviously, challenges and blessings of a vacancy. Let's just think about that a minute. What are the challenges of a vacancy? What's the downside of a vacancy? And some of this is maybe obvious, but I think it's worth asking. What's wrong with a vacancy?
You don't have a contact person when you need if somebody visited in the hospital. A death.
Yeah, there are tasks that are hard to get accomplished, right? Who's going to do it? If you don't have a pastor, that's one. Other potential downsides. Who's kind of in charge? You can have a board of elders, but oftentimes the pastor, is the point man in that each time. Any other challenges? I think of the stress on the vacancy pastor. I mean, if there is somebody, sometimes that guy's got his own congregation, and now he's trying to cover this as well. I think about the potential discouragement. You talked about that. The congregation that, what, has the Lord abandoned us? Are we just a ship afloat at sea? Are we lost? Can be some of the downsides of a vacancy. Lower attendance, if you see it, when the pastor goes on vacation, I used to see that in Houghton every time. I go on vacation, I can just guarantee the attendance goes down. Well, a vacancy more so, right? When the cat's away, the mice, or whatever, that hurts. And so with that comes the offerings, and it sometimes becomes a kind of a vicious cycle. You want to add to that, Kurt?
But there are members of congregations who are there because of their relationship with that pastor. When that pastor leaves and someone comes in, I might have the only pastor they ever knew in their life. They were and now that relationship isn't there. If the other members of the congregation are not looking out for their brothers and sisters, it might be in peril.
Very true, right? Oftentimes, connection too. So how do we deal with that? We need to trust that the Lord will provide, right? It's about faith, saying, God, you're still in charge. All things work together for the good of those who love him. God, you've got a plan here. Our times are in your hands. And pray that the Lord provides workers, right? So is there any upside? What are ways in which a vacancy can help a congregation? Any upside to a vacancy? How might it serve a good purpose? Kurt?
Sometimes it can be a wake-up call. Sometimes the congregation needs to look and say, wow, what are all the things, especially in small congregations, we put on the pastor's plate? And he did the bullshit. He did everything was on the pastor's plate. Now they maybe acquire a different thought habit of our congregation. And what do we really want a pastor to do here? How does he serve us as our shepherd on our welcome call? They can just look at themselves differently and say, well, this is our congregation, and a pastor come in, and if he come in right after the guy, everything would have been the same expectation. And now the pastor comes in, they maybe don't have that relationship. And for sure, when that call is finally accepted, fervent prayers have been answered. And the joy that congregation has, having a shepherd again.
Great point. Those three things. It increases appreciation for a called worker when you have one. When you've had them the whole time, you've maybe taken it for granted. Number two, it allows lay people to step up and serve in ways they maybe didn't before. And number three, maybe it forces you to kind of reevaluate your ministry. What doesn't need to get done? We don't have the manpower. What is extra stuff that we're putting on the pastor? All those can be good things to kind of streamline a congregation, get it focused on what's really important. I always said, my congregation in Houghton, the most organized it was in the whole time I was there was the day I left. Because finally, I took a call. It's like, man, I got to get some people to do some things here. I got to train a secretary. I got to train these guys to, get all these things. And I'm thinking, why didn't I do that like 4 years ago? Would have been so much easier. It's just the way it goes. You take it on yourself instead of training others to do it. Go ahead, Mike.
Guilty.
Guilty. Same thing. So certainly there can be a benefit to that. And so, we pray that God use that process in all things. Okay, a couple other things. Decision process itself. So we're just going to think through a little bit of what a pastor thinks through to make his decision. First of all, he's got 2 divine calls, right? He's got the call to his current place and a call to a new place. The pastor receives a call. He now has 2. He has a decision to make. What does he do? He discusses it with the congregational leaders. He seeks input from trusted people in his family, his friends, his co-workers. He discusses it with his wife and family, and he does a lot of praying, right? This is all part of that process. So, first, if a call is divine, namely from God, why does the person have a choice or decision, right? God's calling me. What am I going to say? No, God, shut up. No, don't I have to go? God's calling. Why would I not? That'd be disobedient, wouldn't it? How do you answer that? I got 2 calls, right? It is the choice between right and right, right? There is no wrong decision. Bob Weimer, one of his favorite lines, anytime we got a call. So here's my advice. Take it or don't. Right? It's either. It's okay. And I think there have been people who have thought, God's calling me. I gotta go, right? I gotta go. No, you don't. You do not feel that takes precedent because it's newer or it's more novel. Both are legitimate, valid calls, right? It's not one or the other. They're equal. How can receiving a call benefit the called worker and the congregation? I mean, sometimes we think, oh, not a call, Sunday nights, the phone rings, and you look and it's out a different area code. I'm thinking, do I even answer this? Do I really want to answer this? But is there a benefit to the called worker and to the congregation? Kurt.
I talked about when you left Appleton and you finally, had peak effectiveness. I know that when I worked in Northern Italy, I knew I was going to come back in 3 to 5 years. And so I was working towards that day. Who am I going to develop as the leaders that are going to replace me in the role of engineering manager? How am I going to go and set this factor up for success long after I'm gone? And I think that some kind of big wake-up call for, okay, it's not this call, but there's going to be a call, and I'm going to accept. Have I prepared the congregation? What else can I do today for that event 6 months, year, what from it?
Great point, right? To prepare us for that. It's good. I always thought, my first call was exploratory, so, we had 13 people. I knew everybody, converted, brought people into the church, etc. And I felt like the only way these birds are going to learn to fly, I can't kick them out of the nest. I can only kick myself out of the nest. I have to leave. For them to learn to fly on their own, I need to leave. And so that was a big factor. Why I left Houghton, a congregation I loved. I just felt like this is their next step, and mine too. I needed to be stretched in a new direction, and so did they. That was the whole point. Brenda.
You could also cut down on taking the workers on the call for granted, because it can be very easy to kind of
get into your routine, not really thinking much about them, like, all comes in, it's like, as workers, you actually have to, like, kind of think, like, oh, wait a minute, it's like, what are the benefits that I have right now, it's benefits going on with the congregation, and it's like, wait, it's like, what do I actually appreciate about this person, and how, like, why would they possibly, like,
Right?
do the cost of not like kind of evaluate?
It can be a wonderful thing for the congregation to just think through this, what blessings have we received from this called worker. Called workers need to hear this, we'll talk about that next time, just the idea that we value you, right? Sometimes we need to hear that. If I never get a call, nobody ever told me I'm doing a good job, it's nice to, when there's a call, you hear that. Doesn't mean you got to be overwhelmed them, but if they never hear anything from anybody, it's like, does anybody care? So that's part of it. Last one there, why is it important for the called worker who has received a call to gather input from a lot of people, right? Objective, third party, they need to hear, right, from other people. I don't want to just have a little vacuum and just think in my own little world. Get that input from others as well. That can be a beneficial thing. Councilman Mary.
So when someone has a call, is it sinful or wrong to call them up and say, you need to stay here? Like, we appreciate you and this is where you need to be.
It's not wrong.
Or don't take it.
We'll talk about that next time. What criteria? I mean, what is helpful advice for a person who has a call? I mean, that's why we're kind of going through this. What is your role in our call, right? We value your advice, but there's probably good advice and maybe not so good advice.
Yeah, and I feel like it's almost a pop-up. It's like, oh, we're praying for you.
Doesn't hurt,
Absolutely.
we're praying for you. We're praying that you stay. Maybe there's more objective advice we can offer as well. We'll do that next time. I'm planning to wrap this up next time, and then we'll move on to something about evolution, secular evolution, some of the concepts with that. So I'm hoping we'll get done with this next week. Let's close with a prayer. Lord God, thank you for guiding the process. Sometimes it can be hard on us, both as called workers and as a congregation, but we know that you can use this and will use this for the good of your church and the good of your children. We're grateful for that. Keep our faith strong as we trust in your hand in this process, to your glory and our good. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless your week, everybody. Hope to see some of you this afternoon.